Russian President Vladimir Putin is in India on a two-day state visit, the highly anticipated trip that marks a pivotal chapter in Moscow-New Delhi ties. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi greeted the Russian president at the Palam Technical Airport, showcasing their strong relationship and admiration for each other, with a warm hug and a car ride together. Now, Prime Minister Modi gifted a Russian edition of Bhagavad Gita to the Russian president, calling teachings of the Gita an inspiration for millions across the world. Today, Putin will receive a ceremonial welcome at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, followed by a visit to Rajghat to pay homage to Mahatma Gandhi. The Russian president will then have bilateral talks with the Prime Minister at Hyderabad House. Discussions are aimed at strengthening economic ties, enhancing trade routes, and advancing cooperation in military, technology, logistics, and innovation. The two leaders are also expected to discuss major projects like the second overhauling of the Su-30 fighter jets, equipping Indian fleet with R-37 air-to-air missiles that can hit targets at up to more than 200 kilometers, along with the S-400 and 500 long range, and Verba, very short-range air defense systems. Now, the two sides are also likely to discuss developing the lighter variant of the missiles like the BrahMos NG, which can be fitted on all types of fighter aircraft of the Indian Air Force. Now, these missiles will have a capability to hit targets at over 400 kilometers, while longer-range versions of the missiles will engage targets at more than 3 times of the present capability. And now, post-lunch, Putin will address the India-Russia Business Forum. Both India and Russia are hoping to energize private sector partnerships and attract new investments. And in the evening, Indian President Draupadi Murmu will be hosting a state banquet in the Russian president's honor. In view of the high-profile visit, traffic restrictions and diversions have been announced in New Delhi. Now, since 2000, Putin has visited India multiple times, his last being in 2021 before the start of the Ukraine war. Now, Vladimir Putin is expected to depart New Delhi around 9:30 p.m. local time. All right, well, joining us on the broadcast is our assistant editor of Foreign Affairs, Nan Sibun, and we're also being joined by our guest, Ambassador Dr. D.P. Srivastav. He's a distinguished fellow at Vivekananda International Foundation and former Indian ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you so much for both of you joining on the broadcast. Siddhant, I'd like to go to you first. If you could just give us a lookout of what we are to expect today and what are the key points that we are looking out for when the bilaterals happen.
Well, it is going to be a packed day. It is just around 9 a.m. Indian Standard Time, and we know that the entire events, the line of events will start at 11 a.m., 2 hours from now, from Rashtrapati Bhavan to the state banquet. But clearly an important day for India-Russia relationship. For India, it is a clear message on the strategic autonomy, which is the core of India's foreign policy. For Russia, this is clearly a message that it is not isolated amidst the Western sanctions. And clearly it has friends at high places, especially here in India. India is one of the largest economy, the most populated country, and the grand welcome we have seen being given to the Russian president, the Indian Prime Minister breaking the protocol. In fact, all today in the morning, all the newspapers have one picture that is dominating here. That is the Indian Prime Minister and the Russian President together in the car traveling. We know that several pacts will be announced. The focus remains on the economic partnership between the two countries, with the Indian side keen that the Russian side imports more Indian agriculture products at a time when Donald Trump's tariffs on India are impacting India economically, and also essentially focus on mobility. That means more Indians traveling to Russia. That is a win-win for both India and Russia at a time when Russia is facing a manpower crunch and India is focusing on the legal mobility of its people, Indians being part of the global workforce.
Absolutely, Siddhant. I'll come over to you, Mr. Ambassador. Now, of course, Siddhant just gave us a look out of what we are supposed to expect. According to you, what are the key strategic areas in which India and Russia are seeking to deepen their cooperation during this meeting, which will stand out?
I think before I go into details, let me just mention that the visit by itself has a huge symbolic importance. It comes at a time when the Ukraine war is perhaps winding up, and it is coming to an end on Russian terms when Russia has the upper hand. So, but still, it's not a done deal. And Russia, for President Putin, visit to India is an important signal that Russia has a constituency. For India, it's a reiteration of a close historical relationship with that country. 71 war, Soviet Union had moved its submarines when the American 7th Fleet was approaching Bay of Bengal. 98, after Pokhran 2 nuclear test, Russia was the first one to sign a DPR for a nuclear power plant with India. And in the recent Operation Sindoor, it was BrahMos and S-400 which proved their mettle. So there's a lot which two countries have in common. And of course, India's continued oil purchase from Russia, despite American oil sanctions, were a tremendous boost to Russia. This does not amount to saying that we funded the war effort in any way. And I may point out that the Europeans continue to buy Russian gas and the Americans continue to buy Russian uranium. So India was not alone, and we did what we had to do, which was a point of principle. We continued to buy Russian crude oil. Perhaps there will be a drop now, and I think the two leaders will be looking at the roadmap for future.
Right, absolutely. Now, Siddhant, I'll just come back to you now. You mentioned the trade. We know that trade is also another topic. Immigration is also another topic. We know that how many Indians did come back from the U.S. How does this people-to-people relations become a big topic when it comes to bilateral relations?
Well, the India-Russia relationship has expanded to over $65 billion. And this is primarily because of India's import of Russian energy. We know that before 2022, the Indian and Russian trade relationship was languishing, and the focus was to increase that. But after that, because of India's import of Russian energy, it has expanded. Now, the aim is to take the India-Russia relationship to $100 billion by the year 2030, approximately 4 years from now. And that is a clear possibility given the economic roadmap both sides are looking forward to. But the big worry and the challenge for India, while the trade has increased, the trade deficit has also increased, and that of course impacts India, because while India is importing from Russia, Russia is not importing as much from India as India is, and primarily the focus now remains as to how that import can start by the Russian side. Both sides are looking at joint action for that, and the focus is on agriculture product, on agriculture produce. India's agriculture produce being imported by Russia, and for that expect later today that both leaders announce a joint roadmap.
Absolutely, and of course, and this is of course as the U.S. does remain India's largest trading partner as a fact. But thank you, Siddhant, for joining us. Of course, we'll be coming back to you to get the latest as it happens and through the day. Ambassador, I'd like to come to you. We were talking about the sanctions. I wonder if these, given the extensive Western sanctions on Russia, to what extent do these restrictions limit Moscow's ability to deliver on the commitments India does expect within this partnership? Because when we talk about the import that Russia does, it is, of course, as Siddhant mentioned, very less.
You know, I mentioned earlier that Europe continues to buy Russian gas and Russian LNG. And there appears to be little prospect for any change in this. They have set a deadline of 27 for stopping purchase of LNG in 2019 and 2028 for stopping purchase of Russian LNG. But that is still too far. So the sanctions have not affected Russia's ability to continue either the war in Ukraine, nor has it brought down the Russian economy to its knees. But the second part of your question, that there's we stood by Russia, but there's a trade imbalance. And if in case there's a reduction in Indian crude oil in the immediate term, the trade volumes will come down. So in order to sustain the relationship in the long run, we need two things. We need a banking solution, which will not depend on dollars. There's already a ruble payment arrangement, but this requires, again, a balanced relationship, because otherwise there's no settlement possibility. And the second thing is that INSTC, India International North-South Transit Corridor, which will reduce the distance and reduce costs of doing business and will be a great boost to Indian exports to Russia. One of the reasons why the export volumes are so low is the high freight cost. And this is what can be reduced in case INSTC is operationalized.
Right. And also, another main aspect we saw this year was the SCO meet, where we saw three big leaders, that is Indian Prime Minister President Putin and Chinese President as well, meeting there. So how do you analyze, how is India managing its broader multipolar foreign policy, particularly in the light of Russia's growing alignment with China?
We also have a close relationship with US, despite the recent friction. And we hope that that relationship will come back to normal. And it's not simply India which is aiming at that. Let's remember that both Russia and China are trying to improve their relations with America. Russia has had, President Putin had a summit meeting with President Trump in Alaska, and President Trump is trying to mediate an end to Ukraine war. And China has been very restrained when it comes to its trade relations with America. So in this situation, I don't think we need to line up against US, because US is a partner and will remain a partner. Improvement of Russian-American relationship will make it easier for Indian foreign policy, to maintain warm relations with both our partners.
Right. And also in this whole talk, we know that how do you think will US be analyzing when it comes to tariff-related concerns? How do you foresee the overall trade balance when it comes to US and India? We know that trade talks will be taking part just next week.
I think, if you look at it in perspective, we have a $47 billion trade surplus with US. We have a $97 billion trade deficit with China. So our problem is not US. Our problem is imbalance in trade with China. And if you keep this perspective in mind, then I think the next step will be to look at ways where we can boost our imports from US. And I think there are areas like LNG. I served on the board of directors of GAIL, and we had started buying LNG, but it can be stepped up. We can increase crude oil purchase. And most important of all, we can buy nuclear reactors from America. This was part of the understanding, reached at the time of NSC exemption, and this has to be operationalized. And this does not simply mean SMR. SMR are only for niche areas. It is still not a commercially deployed solution anywhere in the world. What we should look at are the fleet reactors, that 1,000 megawatt, say Westinghouse reactor, which are operating, which even China has bought.
Right.
So that will go a long way in bridging the trade gap.
Absolutely. Of course, one thing to look out for is also the defense pact when we talk about India and Russia ties. Very little time and a lot to talk about. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and giving your perspective.
Thank you.